You're Sicilian, huh?
Sicilian.
You know, I read a lot, especially about things, about history. I find that shit fascinating. Here's a fact, I don't know whether you know or not. Well, Sicilians were spawned by...
Come again?
No, it's a fact. Yeah. You see, Sicilians have black blood pumping through their hearts. And no, if you don't believe me, you can look it up. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, you see, the Moors conquered Sicily, and the Moors are...
Yes.
See, way back then, Sicilians were like wops from northern Italy. They all had blonde hair and blue eyes. But, well, then the Moors moved in there, and, well, they changed the whole country. They did so much fucking with Sicilian women, huh? That they changed the whole bloodline forever. That's why blonde hair and blue eyes became black hair and dark skin. You know, it's absolutely amazing to me to think that to this day, hundreds of years later, that Sicilians still carry that gene. Now this, I'm quoting history. It's written. It's a fact. It's written.
I know this guy.
No. Your ancestors are... Hey. Yeah. And your great-great-great-great-grandmother fucked an... Oh, yeah. And she had a half kid. Now, if that's a fact, tell me, am I lying? 'Cause you're part eggplant. No!
According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the Moors, as early as the Middle Ages and as late as the 17th century, were commonly supposed to be black or very swarthy, and hence the word is often used for Negro. There is considerable difficulty, however, in determining the ethnicity of the early Moors through terminology alone. Indeed, there are several terms that have been used to identify the Moors. Arabic texts, for example, rarely used the word Moor, and instead applied the term Berber, a word thought by some to be pejorative, to the early non-Arab peoples of northwest Africa. And when not employing that term, they utilised the clan names of the Berbers themselves. In addition, early Christian sources often applied the term Saracen indiscriminately to Muslim populations in general, including the Moors. Although scholars generally agree that the word Moor is derived from Maori, there are profound disagreements on what the word originally meant and how it was applied. Philip K. Hitti contends that the term Moor has a geographic designation meaning Western. Hitti, the author of the comprehensive History of the Arabs, writes that the Romans called Western Africa Mauritania, and its inhabitants Maori, presumably of Phoenician origin meaning Western, whence Spanish Moro and the English Moor. The Berbers, therefore, were the Moors proper, but the term was conventionally applied to all Muslims of Spain and northwestern Africa. Using Greek and Roman sources, Frank M. Snowden has pointed out that the Maori, a northwest African people whose colour received frequent notice, were described as nigri, black, and adusti, scorched. The Roman dramatist Plautus 254 to 184 BC, maintained that the Latin word Maurus was a synonym for Niger. In contrasting the Moors of the 6th century with another racial group in North Africa, Procopius, circa 550, wrote that they were not black-skinned like the Moors. Isidore, a Catholic scholar and the Archbishop of Seville, 587 to 636, wrote that the word Maurus meant black. French historian Jean de Vis writes that the Castilians were at first acutely aware of the power of black fighting men, and in time transferred the old feeling of hostility from Ethiops to the Black Moor. As is well known, not all of the battles during these years of Islamic domination resulted in Moorish victories. For example, during a fierce engagement in 1096 between the Moors and Spanish Christians, 4 Moorish princes were killed. Around 1281, Peter III of Aragon commemorated this Christian victory with the armorial bearings of a cross cantoned between 4 woolly-haired Moors. This coat of arms was updated by the Habsburg King Charles on a gold coin shortly after 1700. Moors with broad noses, thick lips, and woolly heads, upon which rest crowns, dominate the coin. During the European Renaissance, explorers, writers, and scholars began to apply the term Moor to blacks in general. A prominent example of this tendency can be found in the work of Richard Hakluyt, a 15th century traveller. Hakluyt recorded that, in old times, the people of Africa were called Ethiops and Nigritai, which we now call Moors, Morenzi, or Negroes. Shakespearean scholar Elmer E. Stoll provides additional insight regarding the use of the word Moor as it relates to late medieval and early Renaissance Europe. A striking proof that the word Moor was, as among the Germans at this time, exactly equivalent to Negro, is not only its use as applied to the curly-haired, thick-lipped Aaron in Titus Andronicus, but also the constant interchange of the two words as applied to the equally unmistakable Negro Eleazar in Lust's Dominion. In the Romance languages, Spanish, French, and Italian, of medieval Europe, Moor was translated as Moro, Moyer, and Moor. Derivatives of the word Moor may be found even today in these same languages. In Spanish, for example, the word for blackberry is mora, a noun which originally meant Moorish woman. Also in Spanish, the adjective for dark-complexioned, which now means brunette, is moreno. We find a similar legacy in the French language. In French, moricot means dark-skinned or blackamoor, while morillion means black grape. Again, as in the Spanish, the Italian word mora means Negro or Moorish female. Also in Italian, mora means blackberry, while moraiola means black olive.
The peopling of North Africa is a complicated story. And it's complicated because North Africa is made up of multiple populations. Now, the very first people there were Africans. And they were descended from the people who created the Saharan rock paintings. And their descendants in North Africa are still there. They're called the Haratin Berbers and the Chauchen Berbers. Then you had a second group of people joining the populations in North Africa, Europeans. There was a European invasion of Egypt, and this invasion was during the time of Ramses III, and these invaders were called the Sea Peoples, coming in from the sea. And they had a big impact, and their descendants are in North Africa today. Then there was the Roman occupation of North Africa in the 2nd century BC, and the Romans ruled North Africa right up until the Arab period. And there was also the Vandal invasion. The Vandals are Germanic speakers. Does that make sense? And that's a very, very important part of history. Scholars don't want to talk about it too much, But it's a very important part of history, trust me on that one. If I've got some time, I might get into it a little bit later on in the presentation. Then, of course, there was the Arab conquest of North Africa. The reason why so many North Africans are called Arabs is because they're not indigenous to Africa. They come in from Arabia, they conquered their way. Does that make sense? And they conquered in the 7th century AD, and right now, 2022, they're still there, and they are the dominant population. Then you have Europeans, another group of Europeans entering North Africa as slaves. And these people entering North Africa as slaves came from the Slavic states. Slavic states, Eastern Europe. Does that make sense? One of the reasons why Eastern Europeans are to this very day called Slavs, and one of the reasons why Western Europeans have beef with Eastern Europeans. And as you know, that's what Brexit was all about. Right? Someone must have mentioned the war. All right, and then you had another group of people joining the population in North Africa, Africans, who were captured as slaves and brought there after the 16th century. Does that make sense? Now, the point is, do not confuse group 1 with group 5. Are we understanding this? And scholars do that, and why they do that is so they can present all black North Africans as descended from slaves in the 16th century, and then present the Europeans that conquered during the Sea Peoples period as the original North Africans. Do you get it? This is why the details matter. Okay, now the original Moors, the oldest art in North Africa are the Saharan rock paintings. And the Saharan rock paintings, we feeling that image? And if you can Google them, you can see they're all Africans. And the descendants of that are the Haratin Berbers and the Chowchen Berbers. And that's what a typical Haratin looks like, all right? But we mentioned the Sea Peoples, the Vandals, the Romans, and their descendants, and intermarriage took place between them and the original Moors. Does that make sense? So you now have Moors that look like this. Are we understanding that? Now, this woman is a part of Moorish history too. Does that make sense? So what usually happens is black scholars say, well, the term Moor means black, so it's black history. No, she's in it as well. Does that make sense? Yeah? All right. So what are the terms that appear in the literature? You've got the term Moor, which is the European term meaning dark or black. That's the term Europeans use to describe the black people in Spanish history. Then you've got the term Berber, and that's the term that Arab scholars use. It's a linguistic term, people speaking Berber. The origins of Berber, by the way, is in East Africa, in the Horn of Africa. You can link ancient Egyptian, you can link Berber, you can link Cushitic, which is Somali, you can link Hausa or Chadic. They all go back to one parent, which is in the Horn of Africa. That automatically tells you that the very first Berber speakers were sub-Saharan Africans. Then you've got the term Arab. Now, a lot of scholars are happier using that because it's better than saying African. Do you see why people are happier saying that? Now, in truth, the term Arab can, with justification, be used because the official language used during the Moorish period was indeed Arabic. Right, the next chapter of the history of the Moors in Spain concerns the Almoravids. So we're now in the African deserts among the Berbers of North and West Africa. In the year 1048, Yahya ibn Ibrahim, ruler of the Berbers of the desert, made a pilgrimage to Mecca. He returned to North Africa with a religious teacher from Mecca called Ibn Yazin, and Yazin attempted to teach Islam among the desert Berbers. He failed and was chased away. So everyone then ended up fleeing to Tekre on the Senegal River. So we're now in Senegal. There they established a monastery and lived as recluses, and then people joined this movement from Senegal, and they became known as El Morabitun, or in English, Morabites. Another word is the French one, marabout. Does that make sense? This is all West Africa now. And the word that you see in the literature is Almoravids. Now in Tekre, the movement grew. Tekrurians wanted their independence from ancient Ghana and saw the new movement as a force that could win that independence. So in 1062, the Almoravids, the same group from the desert and now people from Senegal, they established Marrakesh, which is the African capital of their empire. So Marrakesh in Morocco used to be a black city. 1076, they conquered ancient Ghana and held it for some years. Tekra became independent of Ghanaian imperial rule. By the time we get to 1082, there were hundreds of Moors and Arabs streaming into Africa, fleeing the campaigns of the Christians because the Moorish rule, the Arab rule in Spain had become unstable and the Europeans were kicking off, so people fled to Africa. They visited Yusuf, leader of the Berbers, and they begged him to get an army together to help, to assist the Muslims against the Christian onslaught that was taking place in Spain. Yusuf raised an army said to have included every ethnic group in the Western Desert and sent them across the sea into Spain, where the African army beat the Christians at Zalaka 1086. That is Yusuf ibn Tashfin. We feeling that? Now, just to put it in perspective, Yusuf ibn Tashfin, can you see Mansa Musa's on the same map? Yes. Who's darker? Right, so can you see the Moor is darker than the Negro? Are you feeling this? Now, isn't that powerful evidence? So anyone wants to run up their mouth, show them this. All right, so did they build anything in Africa? In Marrakesh, that's one of the monuments there. So if you go in that monument and you look up, that's what's there. Now, as ruler of Spain, Yusuf's forces seized Seville, dethroned its Islamic rulers. He accused them of being sunk in pleasure and sloth. And the result was the Almoravid Empire had a court in Africa centered in Marrakesh and a court in Spain centered in Seville. And according to Lady Lugard, this established once more a supreme sultan upon the throne of Andalusia. The dynasty which he founded must be regarded as an African conquest and an African dynasty. That's coming from Lady Lugard, the same woman that named Nigeria. Same woman. All right, now the Almoravid Empire was very extensive. Under their sway were the lands of Senegal, Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, and Spain, with 13 kings acknowledging the overlordship of Yusuf. So can we see a map? We feeling that? A little bit big, isn't it? So what did they achieve? The Almoravids are probably the people responsible for spreading golden coinage into Europe. From the 12th century, the Christian Spaniards minted golden coinage to imitate the Almoravid coins. In 13th century mints in Florence, Genoa, Marseille, and Venice turned out golden coins in imitation of those of the Christian Spaniards. And in 14th century Europe, Northern Europe, we start to see golden coins. And when golden coins were made in Britain, what name were they given? Guineas. And according to El Idrisi, I mentioned him a minute ago, El Idrisi, gold was minted at some place in the extreme west of Africa in the 12th century and put into circulation. That might be where the Almoravid coins came from. All right? Okay, now, the Almoravids tried something in Spain. We're not quite sure what the something was, but they got their butts whooped. And the result then was the Kingdom of Aragon issued a crest that shows that the Christian cross has beaten the 4 Moorish princes. Does that make sense? All right, now can you see how the Moors are depicted? No ambiguity there, right? And then when the Habsburg dynasty came along, they took the same crest and turned it into one of their coins. And can you see that not only have we got the crowns, can you see the hair? Are we feeling that? And you know, you've got places like Corsica, Sardinia, those kind of places. You want to look at their flags. Yeah? We are on their flags. All right, now, that was the Almoravids. The next dynasty are the Almohades. And they began as a religious movement among the Mezmuda Berbers of Morocco. And according to the documents from the time, the Mezmuda Berbers were described as blacks by Abu Shama in his Kitab al-Rabdatayan. Blacks, Sudan. Does that make sense? So in 1106, Ibn Tumart completed his religious education and preached against the Almoravid establishment, who he accused of being lax and luxurious. So Ibn Tumart himself was declared to be the Mahdi, which is the Messiah. What happened next? Well, Abdul Mumin, another Masmuda Berber, took control of the movement. He was a brilliant organizer who unified the various Berber groups into a cohesive force. And there was therefore a power struggle between the Almoravid establishment and the newly rising Almohades. And the newcomers triumphed in 1147. They seized Marrakesh and executed the last Almoravid monarch. The documents say he was deprived of his head. And 1150, they became masters of Spain. Thus, for a second time, says Lady Lugard, a purely African dynasty reigned upon the most civilized throne of Europe. This is why you've got to quote this stuff. You follow me? All right, so did they build anything in Africa? This is the Koutoubia Mosque of Marrakesh. Let's take a look inside. Is that not exquisite? We feeling that? All right, now the city of Seville in Spain became the African capital in Spain. Was a fine city of famous gardens, squares, and a suspension bridge. It had good streets lined with magnificent buildings and spacious houses. The courtyards were planted with trees that bore oranges, lemons, and other fruits. And they had a population of perhaps 500,000 people. All right, that's there right now. We feeling that? This is the El Cazaba Palace. If you get the opportunity to take a look, take a look. And of course, the Heralde of Seville. Now that is, that building now is a cathedral, but you can infer what it would have been before it was a cathedral. It was the mosque. Yeah? Meanwhile, did I mention that there were translation houses that were established in certain parts of Europe that were translating texts from Arabic to Latin? By now, those places had borne fruit. And by the 12th and 13th centuries, we get the rise of the major European universities. Bologna in Italy, 1158. Montpellier, France, 1180. Oxford, England, 1200. Toulouse, France, 1223. Rome, Italy, 1245. Cambridge, England, 1257. Are we feeling this? And this is the beginnings of what's going to become known as the European Renaissance. Now, there was much disunity among the Almohades, and therefore things fell apart. There was African and Arab disunity. I don't want to get into that. No, let me get into that. Why not? Have we got time? There's a document, Abu Ghaffar refusing the post of Secretary of Granada, and he refused the post because he had to work along the Sultan's son. And he wrote, the dark-skinned Berber seemed to him far below his own intellectual standards. Now, just marinate on that. All right, now the Kingdom of Granada. Right, this is now the 4th dynasty. And according to Professor Lane Poole, the Kingdom of Granada was the last bulwark of the Moors in Spain. It was not much that was now left of them. Between 1238 and 1260, Fernando III of Castile and Jaime I of Aragon conquered Valencia, Córdoba, Seville, and Murcia. And the rule of the Moors was now restricted to the present province of Granada. Within this limit, however, their kingdom was destined to endure for another 2 centuries and a half. Though hemmed in on all sides, the Moors were well served by soldiers. The people of the conquered cities, the most valiant warriors of the vanquished Muslim states, came to place their swords at the disposal of the one remaining Mohammedan king. 50,000 Moors are recorded to have fled to his protection from Valencia, and 300,000 from Seville, Xeres, and Cadiz. Nevertheless, Granada was forced to become tributary to the Castilian crown. The founder of the dynasty of the Beni Nazir, i.e. the Nasrids, an Arab called Ibn al-Ahmar, the red man because of his fair skin and hair, was a vigorous sovereign. So this now is not an African dynasty. This is now an Arab dynasty. Does that make sense? But it seems that Africans stepped very, very correctly. Here's how. Because it seems that they worked out, better marry him off to this woman and keep that going. So by the time we get to the end of this dynasty, they're black. So yeah, they stepped very correctly here. What have we got? Okay, now in the case of Ibn al-Ahmar, we read, he paid homage and tribute to Fernando and his son Alfonso the Learned, not, however, without more than one struggle to free himself from their yoke, and from that time forward, Granada, with its surrounding territory, was generally left alone. All right, now what's there? We feeling this? By the way, if you ever go to the site of Alhambra and you want to document what's there, it will take you about 4 hours to photograph everything, and that's if you're at it. Yeah? All right, towards endgame. After 1417, however, Muslim leadership in Granada became more and more unstable. There were short-lived reigns, factional fighting, and rulers getting their backing from the Christians. After 1469, the kingdoms of the Christians, Aragon and Castile, had become united by the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella. From 1484, they campaigned against the Moors and gradually closed in and then blockaded the city. So we get the conquest of Granada, 2nd of January, 1492. Ferdinand and Isabella entered Granada as its masters. They exiled Abu Abdallah. Abu Abdallah is his proper name, but in European accounts he's called Boabdil. Abu Abdallah, Boabdil, same person. So they exiled Abu Abdallah, where his descendants learned to beg for their daily bread. 4 years later, King Manuel of Portugal ordered the expulsions of the Africans. Those expulsions continued up to the time of King Philip III, who completed the policy in 1609. Some returned to North and West Africa, but others fled elsewhere in Europe. Where in Europe did some of them go? England. You follow me? John Blank, all that stuff. Yeah, they end up here, some of them. It is stated, writes Professor Lane Poole, that no less than 3 million of Moors were banished between the fall of Granada and the first decade of the 17th century. They were cleaned out. All right, now the question is how do the Spaniards remember this? Now, a documentary was made by Raggy Omar, and it's like, bruh, you dropped the ball. You're going to see how Raggy Omar dropped the ball. Talking about things that don't matter, when things that do matter don't get mentioned. Does that make sense? But why it's important is there's a Spanish ritual where they've got these puppets that they're holding up. And the puppets, you can infer, one of them is supposed to be Ferdinand, one of them is supposed to be Isabella, one of them is supposed to be Boabdil, Abu Abdallah, and one of them is Boabdil's mother. Now the mother is veiled. Does that make sense? But you can see her hands. All right, check this out, you all.
The only remnants of Islamic Al-Andalus in this procession are these giant puppets of Granada's last Muslim rulers, Boabdil and his queen. But of the Jews, nothing remains. And those who converted even lost their identities. They were given Christian names. But to the church, they would always be infidels at heart.
Did you like the betrayal of Abu Abdallah and his mother? Are we feeling that? And notice it wasn't me that did that. I ain't got nothing. They didn't ask me, trust me. That's how the Spanish are remembering that. All right, a European scholar's assessment. Professor Lane Poole says, in 1492, the last bulwark of the Moors gave way before the crusader Ferdinand and Isabella, and with Granada fell all Spain's greatness. For a brief while indeed, the reflection of the Moorish splendor cast a borrowed light upon the history of the land, which it had warmed with its sunny radiance. The great epoch of Isabella, Charles V, Philip II, Columbus, Cortez, and Pizarro shed a last halo about the dying moments of a mighty state. Then followed the abomination of desolation, the rule of the Inquisition, and the blackness of darkness in which Spain has been plunged ever since. In the land where science was once supreme, the Spanish doctors became noted for nothing but their ignorance and incapacity, and the discovery of Newton and Harvey were condemned as pernicious to the faith. Where once 70 public libraries had fed the minds of scholars and 500,000 books had been gathered together at Cordova for the benefit of the world, such indifference to learning afterwards prevailed that the new capital, Madrid, possessed no public library in the 18th century. And even the manuscripts of the Escurial were denied in our own days to the first scholarly historian of the Moors, though himself a Spaniard. The 16,000 looms of Seville soon dwindled to a fifth of their ancient number. The arts and industries of Toledo and Almeria faded into insignificance. The very baths, public buildings of equal ornament and use, were destroyed because cleanliness savored too strongly of rank infidelity. In other words, if you washed yourself too much, that proves that you're not a real Christian. Get it? That's what that means, right? The land, deprived of the skillful irrigation of the Moors, grew impoverished and neglected. The richest and most fertile valleys languished and were deserted. Most of the populous cities which filled every district of Andalusia fell into ruinous decay, and beggars, friars, and bandits took the place of scholars, merchants, and knights. So low fell Spain after she had driven away the Moors. Such is the melancholy contrast offered by her history. Now, let me just say one thing about this. In the 19th century, that's the period where scholars were developing theories of white racial superiority. Does that make sense? And there was something that was around called the Negro question. And the great philosopher, John Stuart Mill, addressed the Negro question by saying two things. What about ancient Egypt? And the next one was, what do you think he said next? What about Spain? And at the time, no one could answer. Because, this book had come out. What were people going to say now? What about Spain?
To further demonstrate, this index of A History of the Wars by Byzantine historian Procopius says, quote, Moor, a black race of Africa. See such and such for an account of their origin in Palestine and migration westward, driven away from Carthage. Close quote. Yes, you heard correctly, Carthage. What's more, this old abridgment, like others of its time, seems to have viewed Palestine as a northeasterly extremity of Africa, something that is conveniently forgotten today by those who artificially limit the historical range of black people groups. Naturally. Speaking of Procopius, in his History of the Wars, he too describes the Moors in physiognomic terms. Quote, And I have heard this man say that beyond the country which he ruled, there was no habitation of men, but desert land extending to a great distance, and that beyond that there are men not black-skinned like the Moors, but very white in body and fair-haired. Close quote. Procopius, A History of the Wars, Book 4. Whatever region of North Africa Procopius is speaking of, once again it is clear to him that the Moors were black-skinned. And to be sure, Procopius is a Roman-era writer of Greco-Syrian origin. His word for black-skinned here centers on the word melas, and is translated straightforwardly by most translators as black-skinned, not dark-skinned. As a useful aside, that Greek word melas is where we get the English word melanin.